Smith & Wesson made some interesting choices in the design of this 380 Shield EZ, in that it is not necessarily the smallest little thing, especially for being a 380. One of the main reasons that someone would opt for a 380 over a 9mm would be for the size, to get something into even more concealable and more compact. Well, this 380 goes in the opposite direction. I'll talk about that in a minute. Part of that is because it's got an internal hammer. So let's say that the length of the gun, if you wanted to have any kind of respectable barrel, which this does at about 3 5/8 of an inch, then you've made another inch or so room for that internal hammer mechanism. So you're going to have a certain amount of length. Well, length, as most of us who conceal carry know, length is not the most important dimension. The other two dimensions that are important, one, where they did do it right, is the thickness. This is a very thin gun, and the reason it's a very thin gun is because it takes a single stack, very thin magazine. It comes with two, just so you know. But it's also fairly tall. It is not exactly really short either. So it makes you wonder, why did they design a single stack magazine? They got a little bit more thin than they really needed to be. In fact, I would say that the grip is actually thinner than the slide, certainly back here where we have those little ears for cocking. So you might almost be thinner than you need to be. You could have had a magazine that was a staggered, like the traditional M&P style magazines, thicker at the bottom, tapering at the top, giving you more capacity, or at least giving you the same capacity in a shorter package. So that's an interesting choice. I don't feel one way or the other about it. I'm just pointing those things out. Because the gun is new and presumably very popular, I know my friends at my local gun store say they can't keep them on the shelves. That's where I found it. I paid $375. MSRP is $399. So they're still commanding pretty much a regular retail price at this point in time. So on the size, here's the 380 EZ and the 9mm Shield, and you can see the length right off the bat difference. And again, we talked about that. But the other thing you can notice is the height. So if I put them side by side here and then lay them down, on the bottom is the 380 EZ, and you can see how much taller it is. Every bit of a quarter of an inch extra height for the 380. Well, that kind of goes in the wrong direction, doesn't it? And then look at the length. You can see the length is certainly significantly longer as well. So it's not smaller. Now the thickness is probably very close. Here's the 45 Shield, and the 45 Shield is a very, very small and thin 45, but it's still a 45, and it's still much bigger than the regular Shield. The 380 EZ, which is now on the right, is actually still longer than the 45 Shield. The sights line up just about exactly, but then you have that little extra grip tang or beaver tail coming out at the back. So the overall length more on the 380 EZ than it is on the 45 Shield, and the height still just a little bit higher. Almost equal here. Almost, but not quite. So there's about, let me see if I can show you, about 1/8 of an inch higher still. So it's a taller gun even than the 45. And the capacity isn't really much different. So you got one more round than the 45. Okay, let's talk magazine for just a moment. It is a single stack, It is a single stack magazine, as I indicated. Holds 8 rounds. You get 2 of them. The magazine also comes with, if you're used to the Ruger 22 long rifle magazines. You might be used to these. Comes with these two little assisting tabs, one on either side, but it sticks out much further on the on this side. I'm not going to call it right or left because it depends which way you're pointing it. And the idea there is to make it even easier to load the magazines. If you have enough trouble working the slide and the action on a handgun, and the reason you're buying the 380 EZ is so you can rack the slide, you're probably not somebody who's going to be able to pull this thing down because that's a little tough. However, here's a little trick. The gun comes with a chamber flag, nice little orange chamber flag. Well, that chamber flag is hollow, the cone, and that fits right on here. You can put that chamber flag over there, set your base plate on something firm, and use it. In fact, if you turn it this way, kind of use it as a little lever while you feed those rounds in. So there you go. Take that chamber flag and put it to use on your magazine. So why is the trigger on the 380 EZ, or the 380 Shield EZ, so light and crisp compared to even the M2.0 striker fired M&Ps? One word: hammer. This is an internal hammer fired pistol. It is not a striker fired pistol. That makes a world of difference in what they can do with the trigger and the way that's going to feel to you. Here is the internal hammer. Right here, this very large and awkward looking shaped hammer. That's what it looks like when it is up in the striking position. Right there. That is the hammer, and that hammer strikes the firing pin, which strikes the primer on the cartridge. We all know how that works, right? But there are a couple of other little things that really aid in the crispness and the smoothness of this trigger. And one of them is the behavior of this grip safety. So here's the grip safety in a close-up, right? We push that in when we grip the pistol. So the web of our hand and our palm pushes that in when we grip the gun. But when we do that, we're moving this little silver bar up. Okay, see that? Yeah, you think, okay, big deal, so what? So when that silver bar is pushed up by the grip safety, what it does is it pushes up and pushes this in the slide. That is the firing pin safety. And that is something on a striker fired pistol that is normally operated as part of the trigger pull. In this case, it is not part of the trigger pull. Simply gripping the pistol moves this firing pin safety up and out of the way. So the trigger does not have to perform that function. So then when you pull the trigger, all you're doing basically is releasing the hammer. Alright, so here's a sort of quick overview on how this grip safety works internally. This is the trigger bar. The silver runs from the actual trigger back to the sear and the linkage that will drop the hammer. So right now with the grip safety disengaged, and I move the trigger, and you can move the trigger, what happens is the trigger bar is redirected downward and it doesn't do anything. Essentially contacts nothing, and this is, you can see, with nothing contacting the grip safety. But if I push in the grip safety and I move the trigger, then you can see it redirects. Let me show you what that looks like just pushing it in. So I push in the grip safety. See, it raises the back of that trigger bar, and that linkage, it redirects its motion, and now with the pull of the trigger, you're moving that linkage, which is going to release that hammer. So that's basically, in a nutshell, and a very oversimplified nutshell, by the way, the two main things that the grip safety is doing. So number one is it's directing the trigger bar so that it will engage the linkage and drop the sear and make the hammer strike. But it's also disengaging the firing pin safety prior to the trigger pull, so that the trigger only has to do one thing, and that is very crisply drop the hammer. Okay, so here's what that trigger pull sounds like. It is so light and crisp. Beautiful short reset. Not a lot of volume there on the reset, but you can feel it. You are right there at the wall. That's another thing with a hammer gun. You usually have some sponge in that reset. You usually have a little bit of creep to take up. There's the reset, and it is right there at the wall. Smith & Wesson did an excellent job of making this a very, very light, crisp trigger. So that's why it's not hinged. There is no safety in the trigger. It is a hammer-fired gun. So it behaves much differently, but also differently than a typical hammer-fired gun. It is definitely a sort of a hybrid. It's the hammer gun that behaves like a striker that behaves like a hammer. Alright, let's see what this trigger actually weighs on the Lyman digital scale. It feels fantastic. Now let's see what it actually shows us on the gauge. Yeah, that's what I thought. 4 pounds, 15 ounces, just underneath 5 pounds on this trigger, which is a fantastic trigger. So just a couple of quick final thoughts or words here on the first 100 with the 380 EZ. First of those being, I didn't feel like I really shot this gun very well. And, I would sometimes say, well, maybe it was just an off day for me, but I had just got done shooting a steel match, and I actually did fairly well. So I was actually nicely warmed up and had been shooting good that day. I had my game on, but I didn't shoot this gun particularly well, and it seemed like I was missing a low left or left in general very consistently. At 15 yards, I was actually having a hard time hitting that little steel target some of the time, and at 10 yards, the groups that I made on paper were not all that very impressive. So I'm going to need to bring it back out and work out some of that and see if, number one, is it possible that I just need to adjust this rear sight a little bit, because that is possible. Number two, is it just something that something about this gun that's giving me a trigger control issue, and I need to work that out. So that I've got to revisit. Because it's got the same ergonomics as all M&Ps, certainly in the Shield family, and that should not have anything to do with it. So that was interesting. Number two, while I had all my cameras off except one, and luckily I did have one going, I had a malfunction, an interesting malfunction. I had a live round stovepipe, which is not something you have all that often. And it was, I believe, the last round in the magazine that gave me that malfunction. And I think, if I recall, I was shooting left hand only, weak hand only. And so, it's possible, very possible, that perhaps I was limp wristing the gun and not holding it firmly enough. That'll be a conversation for a different day, whether or not it should give you that problem, whether this gun should give you that problem, even if that's the circumstance. But luckily I did catch it on camera with the one camera, and out of about 130 or so rounds total, one malfunction, it's less than 1%, so that's not terrible, but that was a bizarre malfunction. So stay tuned for revisiting that. Otherwise, I like this gun a lot. Very impressed with it. I'm as impressed as I expected to be in most cases, except that, number one, I don't shoot it good yet, and number two, it might be prone to some malfunctions. Thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget, Just an Opinion channel is also on full30.com, and I am gradually adding to my content over there. I'm trying to keep everything new going over there, so this video can be seen over there too. And I'm on Facebook, and also, for those interested, on Patreon as well.